You guys having a good night tonight? Everybody, so far? Good night? Awesome. Still loud? Somebody still? It is what it is. Just a reminder, next week, we have a night of worship and prayer happening over in that building. So if you don't have plans or you plan on being here, we're going to be over there. And I would like to invite you to show all the other people that exist on this campus and this church that the youth are invested in what Jesus is doing in and through them. And so I'd love it if they could see your faces on the front row worshiping and praying. And then the week after that, I'd like to, oh, look at that. We got announcements. Look at that. The week after that, no midweeks, all right? November 22nd. The next day is Turkey Day, gobble, gobble, all right? And my wife's birthday. So we're not going to be here. If you show up here, it's going to be you. The lights are going to be out, a locked door, and the Holy Spirit. So, feel free. I would love for you to be here just to get on your knees and pray before the Lord over this house, but no one else is going to be here praying with you, all right? They're all going to be traveling to Kentucky or wherever you go for Thanksgiving. I will not be in Kentucky. I'll be in Tennessee. Actually, we'll be here that day. Anyway, and then lastly, if you're interested in playing for the band, I've got some spots that I would like to start getting some more volunteers rotating in and through. So if you're like, hey, I have some musical talent, I would love for you to talk to me after. You get to work with people like Riley and Lucas Clark and Vince, who plays drums for us, and it's a good time. And Micah, who plays bass. There's a couple of them running around. It's awesome. All right, y'all. If you got a Bible, and you should, it's on the seat provided for you. We're going to be in Exodus 4. And like I explained last week, anytime that we have kind of a one-off or a two-off week, we're going to do this thing called OldTimers. So we're in volume 1 of OldTimers, and what we're doing is we're intentionally studying something from the Old Testament and then examining, okay, how does the Old Testament that we don't really talk about a lot in the modern church, how does it apply to my life? How does it connect to Jesus? Does it connect to Jesus? Does it connect to my life? And so tonight is no different. And so I want to ask this question off the top tonight. What's your excuse? What's your excuse? Some of you are like, do I smell? Did I not wear the right clothes? Some of y'all looked offensive already. No, I'm just asking that, okay? There's nothing you should make an excuse for. But more so, are you an excuse-giving person? I know I am. Like, are you an excuse-giving person? Like, you forgot to do your homework, you walk into class, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, I don't know which one you got, right? We all had one. And they're looking at you and they're like, hey, where's your homework? And you're like, the famous of all famous excuses given, my dog ate my homework. Y'all, I was a teacher in Jacksonville, Florida for 2 years, and I actually did get that reason once. And the only reason I believed that student was because he then showed me a picture and was like, here's my dog, and here's my dog with my homework in his mouth. And I was like, okay, that actually, like, that's real. Like, that just happened. I thought it was just like movies or something. But like, are you an excuse-giving person? Maybe it's like you break up with that boyfriend or girlfriend, or you're trying to get with a boyfriend or girlfriend, and you give the classic, God told me, right? God told me you're the one, or God told me you're not the one. Like, we ain't dating no more. Even though, like, I've studied this, and nowhere in there does it say that Joe does not date Emily, right? Like, it's not in there, but you're like, God told me, right? We've all heard or given excuses. It's like this instinctive reaction in our culture. It's like a reflex almost. And a lot of them, they're starting to get more and more believable. Like, they're not just plain lies. They're not weak. Like, they've got a grain of truth to them. And a lot of you guys have enough charisma that when you give an excuse, like, people buy it. They're like, oh, okay, cool. Like, I guess that's what it is. Like, I'm convinced. Now, I also understand that at times there are, like, legitimate reasons, legitimate excuses for why you miss something, right? Like, toilet blows up. That's real. Okay, I've helped my mom replace the toilet in our house. Like, you're going to spend more time fixing that sewage issue than you are anything else. Hey, Nate, they are correct. If you could bring me down just a touch more, buddy. Thank you. Maybe it's the car dies. Actually, in Jeff Paskey's case, I'm going to call him out right now. Love you, Jeff. Jeff had 2 tires pop on his way here. 2 of them. Not 1 tire. Not like hit a rock. Like 2. Both on the same side. Actually, I guess it'd been more interesting if it had been like catty corner angled. But like, that's a real reason to be late. Like, you can't go anywhere on flat tires, or you're dragging sparks all the way down the road. Your parents get sick. Your parents miss an email. Like at times, there are real reasons why you miss an obligation. You don't get to hang out with a friend. You're late to class. And so I Googled the definition of excuse so that we could see what we're working with, and this was the primary result. Google gave me this answer. An excuse is a verb. It is an attempt to lessen the blame attached to usually a fault or an offense, and is an attempt to seek to defend or justify an action. We use excuse to justify our actions. And it's usually when our actions are offending or causing a disruption to something or someone else, right? Like you call someone smelly, and they're like, "What'd you say to me?" And you're like, "Well, I think somebody was cutting vegetables over there." Like you're attempting to defend why you call that person smelly, and you're trying to get out of a consequence. And so we've all done this. In fact, I would argue that only a small margin of the excuses that you and I give are legitimate or justified. And that a majority of the time we are trying to reduce or lessen a coming consequence or get something out of something. Like we're trying to get out of something, like taking the trash out, right? Your parents are like, "Hey, I told you to do this thing. You need to go take the trash out," and you don't do it. And they come to you, "Why did you not take the trash out?" You're not going to own it and tell them I was playing Xbox. You're going to be like, "Well, you see, that other person you created, my sister, she was fighting me and locked me in my room, so I couldn't take the trash out. She had the key," right? Like you give an excuse. You're trying to get out of the consequence of having not taken the trash out. So I want to ask you this, and it's going to feel a little painful, and it goes for me too, and the adults will sit with it as well. What's your excuse when it comes to God? What's the excuses you give to God? Do you believe that He has a calling and a plan for your life? And He does. And so here's the main idea I want you to sit in tonight, is that when we give God excuses, we are communicating a stubborn heart. When our response to God is an excuse, a reason why we can't do the thing He's called us to, we're communicating that we are being stubborn, that we're being selfish, that it's all about me. So tonight we're going to examine Moses, and he gave a bunch of excuses, like a lot. He was a complainer. And so you see, before we look at Exodus 4, we have to know Exodus 3. And Exodus 3 is this famous burning bush scene. How many of you guys have seen The Prince of Egypt, the movie? The animated movie, it's a classic. You grew up in a... Okay, awesome. Some of you guys have seen that. If you've not seen it, you should go watch it. There's a lot of musical numbers people love. All right? It's kind of like that. So there's this moment where Moses, he's a farmer. He's out in the wilderness. He's got his sheep with him. There's this bush randomly out in the desert. Kudos to the bush. It survived, right? And so he's out there, and all of a sudden the bush just catches fire. Just whoop, up it goes. Except that it's not burning. It's on fire, but the leaves are still there. The stems are still there. It's not cinder on the ground. And Moses is like, "I'm going to go and investigate this." He's like all men. When men see wet paint signs, we do this number right here. Yep, it's wet. Yep. We can't just see a thing and be like, "Oh, I should not go over there." No, so Moses is like, "Hey, look, fire. I shall go towards the fire." That's what Moses does. That's what he does. So he goes over there, and all of a sudden, God just speaks to him from the bush, and Moses is told to take his shoes off, and it becomes holy ground. And what God begins telling him is, he's like, "Hey, I've heard the cries of my people Israel who are slaves in Egypt, and I'm going to free them, and I'm going to use you." And Moses is like, I don't know. Instead of being like Abraham last week where we talked about his obedience, Moses was like, "Pause, God. Can I have a word in this conversation?" And what we're about to examine is that God is responding to Moses as he puts a pause, as he begins to throw some excuses up as to why he's not the one that can be used. So that brings us to this moment with a burning bush not being consumed, God speaking out of it, and Moses on his knees and with his sandals off. So Exodus 4, verse 1 through 9 says this: "Moses answered, 'What if they won't believe me?'" It's a good question. "Will not obey me, but say, 'The Lord did not appear to you.' The Lord asked him, 'What is that in your hand?' 'A staff,' he replied. 'Throw it on the ground,' he said. So Moses threw it on the ground. It became a snake, and he ran from it. The Lord told Moses, 'Stretch out your hand and grab it by the tail.' So he stretched out his hand and caught it, and it became a staff in his hand. This will take place, he continued, so that they will believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you. In addition, the Lord said to him, put your hand inside your cloak. So he put his hand inside his cloak. When he took it out, his hand was diseased, resembling snow. Put your hand back inside your cloak, he said. So he put his hand back inside his cloak, and when he took it out, it had again become like the rest of his skin. If they will not believe you and will not respond to the evidence of the first sign, they may believe the evidence of the second sign. And if they don't believe in these two signs or listen to what you say, take some water from the Nile, pour it on the dry ground, and the water you take from the Nile will become blood on the ground. Now, in verse 1, I think Moses asks a great question. Hey, what if they don't believe me? Like, you call me to go to these people. The last time I was there, I murdered a dude. 2 guys saw me. I buried that guy like a cat in a litter box in the sand. Then I ran away. Y'all, Bible's not boring. You should really read it, okay? Exodus 1-3. Have fun. Go for it. But that's the last time he was there. So he's like, God, I don't know. It wasn't great last time I was there. And technically, he's a prince, too. And so God provides 3 signs for Moses to perform so that it proves that God is who he says he is. And verses 1-5 covers God's power over living creatures. Y'all, they didn't live in cities like we do. They didn't live with men who would go out and beat up lions, tigers, and bears, oh my. Like, if a wild animal approached them, it was like a 50-50 chance of you get to live, you get to die. And what God's proven to Moses, he's like, hey, even the wild things, the wild animals, the creatures that can kill you, I've got control over them. I'm more powerful than them. Verses 6-8 is God's power over sickness. That's what he's proving with the hand in and out of the cloak and it turning disease and turning well, is God saying, hey, no matter what sicknesses these people have gone through, I've got power over that. And verse 9 is God's power over water, which is a crucial cornerstone of life. You can only go 3 days without water before your body gives up and you get to go meet Jesus, okay? Now, you can go like 40 days without food. Some of you have tested it because you're picky eaters. You know who you are. All right? And so what God is communicating to us then, he's communicating this to Moses, is that God is sovereign over every area of our life. God is sovereign over every area of our life. What does that mean? It means that God's in control. It means that he's got this. He is the authority. He has the authority. It's like Jesus in the boat when the disciples are sleeping. There's a storm, and they're like, Jesus, wake up, we're going to die. And Jesus is like, storm, shut up. And it does. That's God. That's your God. That's my God. That's our God. He has the authority. He has the sovereignty. And one would think this demonstration of authority would be enough for Moses. No, it's never enough for Moses, ever. So verse 10, because Moses' hesitation is to go where he was called wasn't based on external fears, but he was actually wrestling with an internal identity issue. Verse 10, Moses says this. He replies to the Lord, please, Lord, I have never been eloquent, either in the past or recently or since you've been speaking to your servant, because my mouth and my tongue are sluggish. The Lord said to him, I love this response, who placed a mouth on humans? Who makes a person mute or deaf, seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. I will help you speak, and I will teach you what to say. Moses is attempting one more excuse here. He's like, hey, I don't speak so good. Like my tongue is sluggeth, and like I have like a lisp, and like I don't talk so good, Lord. Like ever since you've been talking to me, even I've been doing the thing. And he's a stutterer. He's not a good communicator. And how many of us have done this with God? How many of us were like, I don't know, God, I would share the gospel. I would share Jesus with those friends, but I don't have the words. Like I don't know what to say. I don't speak so good. I don't have a great reputation. Like I did some shady stuff before I met Jesus, and I don't know if they'd listen to me. I don't have all the answers, God. What if they were to ask me a question about the Bible that I don't know? I don't know. I don't have all the answers. Or I'm not sure I'd be convincing. I'm not sure they'd listen to me. I'm not sure they'd come with me. Like how many of us have done that? Listen, what defects do we use to excuse God's call in our life? You are called. If Jesus is the Lord of your life, he told you to go. Your classroom is where you are called. Your sports team, your theater troupe, your dance team, your clubs, your after-school activities, your family, your neighborhood. You are called to those places to bring the gospel. That is where you are called to go. And you've been called to share the good news with them. And what are the things you're like, I don't know, God. I got this limp, and I don't think they're going to listen to me. What defects have you brought before the Lord? And here's what I love about verse 11 and 12, which is the part where God looks at him and he's like, dude, who made the mouth? Who gave sight? Is it not me? See, what I love about that is God doesn't need us. He doesn't need us. God hung the planets in the sky with a word. What makes you think that he can't accomplish his will on earth without you? What is so great about me that I can be like, hey, God, hold on. If I were to do it my way, right? Like, let me add to your plan. He doesn't need us. God doesn't need us. But he wants us. He wants to use us. He wants to use you. He wants to prove his power and his strength and his love and his grace through you. He didn't need Moses, but he chose Moses. He doesn't need us, but he's choosing us. He's choosing you. And so the next verse gets down to the hard issue of what's really going on with Moses. Verse 13, Moses says this, please, Lord, send someone else. Please, Lord, send someone else. You see, Moses' greatest barrier was his unwillingness to go where he had been called. He was out of excuses, and his heart was revealed. You see, Moses uses the term Lord. That means he's acknowledging God's sovereignty. He understands that regardless of any weakness Moses brings before God, any excuse Moses brings before God, that God has the power to handle that thing. Like we talked about last week with Jehovah Jireh, God is the provider. Regardless of what weakness you think you have, God's power is greater. He can handle it. He created you. And so how often are we like Moses that we're stubborn, that we just simply don't want to go? How often are we in rebellion because we don't know God's power or we don't trust God's power? We believe that we have too many weaknesses, the lack of knowledge, not enough faith, a stutter, a limp, a disability, you name it. And so we excuse away the call that God has placed on our lives. When I was studying for this message, God reminded me that Paul even talks about this concept in the New Testament. You see, in 2 Corinthians 12, Paul is sharing about how he had been given this thorn in the flesh, this weakness, this ailment, and he prays over and over. He's like, God, take it away, take it away, take it away. And God's like, nope, nope, nope. And then Jesus gives Paul these words, and it's beautiful. 2 Corinthians 12:9 says, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is perfected in weakness. Therefore, I will most gladly boast all the more about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may reside in me. Our weaknesses are so that when God shows up and does the miraculous, he gets the glory and not us. Our weaknesses, things that inhibit us, when we push through in faith and say, okay, God, you know my weakness, use me anyway, it's so that he gets the glory and not you and not me. Listen, when we are unwilling to go, we miss out on God's power working in our lives. So many of us want to witness God's power up close and personal. I believe that many of us in this room have probably prayed that prayer. God, show me. God, do something amazing. God, tell me. But then we aren't willing to walk in faith into the areas where he will supply it and where he will prove it. So in Exodus 4:14, we see what happens with Moses next. It says this, and the Lord's anger burned against Moses and said, isn't Aaron the Levite your brother? I know that he can speak well, and also he is on his way now to meet you. He will rejoice when he sees you. You will speak with him and tell him what to say. I will help both you and him to speak and will teach you both what to do. He will speak to the people for you. He will serve as a mouth for you, that thing that Moses complained about, and you will serve as God to him. And take this staff in your hand that you will perform the signs with. Now, I want to clarify, this doesn't mean that Moses becomes God to Aaron. Moses is simply, it's God speaking to Moses. Moses then speaks to Aaron. Aaron speaks to the people of Israel on God's behalf, on Moses' behalf. Now, I want you to notice that God doesn't even I don't know of anybody else in the Bible whose grave was hand dug by the hand of God. But that means he grew from this point, because right now we got a complainer, we got someone trying to run away, we got someone trying to flee. And instead, because he began to finally lean into faithfulness and he was obedient, he got past the excuses and trusted God, he got such an honor at the end of his life. And so I want you to understand this. There is no excuse too great for God that he doesn't want to use you for his glory, his kingdom, his mission, and your good. There is no excuse too great. There is nothing you can throw at the king of the universe. He hung Saturn for Pete's sake. When you can hang Saturn in the sky with a word, I think then you might have some, not much, some negotiating rights with the Lord. Some. There's no excuse too great. Because your obedience to God, your trust in God, your surrender of excuses is how you gain a front row seat to God's power in his kingdom. And what God can do through you is not reliant on your strength or your power or skill. I want you to see some of the end of this. Exodus 4:29 through 31, it says this: Then Moses and Aaron went and assembled all the elders of the Israelites. Aaron repeated everything the Lord said to Moses and performed the signs before the people. The people believed, and when they heard that the Lord had paid attention to them and that he had seen their misery, they knelt low and worshiped. First, notice that Moses and Aaron obeyed. They pushed through, they got past the excuses, they went. They repeated the things to the Israelites that God told them to. And verse 31 is key. The people believed not because of Moses and Aaron. They believed because they heard and they saw that God had heard and seen them. And then their response was worship. There may be people in your life who are this close to a relationship with God, and the thing they're waiting on is for someone to come and spend time with them. And your presence might be that key that unlocks it. And it's not because of you. It's because through you, they've seen that God has seen and heard their prayers. That they're praying, God, would somebody just step into the situation of bullying and be with me? Because I don't know if you're real or not. God, my parents' divorce is really hard to handle right now. Would you give me a friend while I walk through this? If you're out there, and by you just simply going where you are called, they can go, wow, God, you heard me. Wow, God, you saw me. Wow, God, you love me. And you might be the key because God's called you to a thing. Because your presence speaks to the one living inside of you. So how do we move past our excuses? I've got 3 ways for you. Number 1 is this: remember God's sovereignty. He's greater than any excuse, failure, flaw, or weakness that you have. He's in control. You're not responsible for the things that happen. They're eternal. Your sports, your school, your future degree, your future marriage, that relationship, that job status, etc. Guys, those things aren't permanent. Yes, do those things well, make wise decisions, don't marry morons, okay? Like, be smart, be God-honoring, but remember, those things aren't going to last forever. Jobs come and go, vehicles break down, people pass away, relationships break up, grades fail, grades pass. But souls are eternal. And so what is it like for you to place the mission of the gospel message greater than the mission of your self-fulfillment? Because right now tonight, all of you do have a calling on your life. And I'm not saying it's as narrow as to be a pastor, a missionary, to be a teacher. The broad calling, the one that we all live under, is the Great Commission, that we're to go and make disciples. That's it. That's the broad calling. And then as you grow in faith, as you, like Moses, take step after step, God will reveal to you the next parts of that plan. So what does it look like, again, for you to place the mission of the gospel greater than your own self-fulfillment? I want to invite the band back up here. They're going to play one more song. We're going to respond. And I want you guys to truly utilize this time. The response time is because the gospel demands a response. The word, listening to it, God, he demands a response. He's inviting us to respond. And so we're not just here on Wednesday nights to fill ourselves up with music and messages or to play games. Those things are all good and fun, and they do glorify God. I absolutely believe that popping balloons does. My prayer, though, is that we would not be a consumeristic student ministry. That means that I believe you're not just supposed to be in here to constantly feed, and be a big, fat spiritual baby. God's called you to go do something. And so I pray that this is a resting place so that when you walk out of here, you go, you do. And so in the next 5 minutes that you have during this song, would you pour yourself out before the Lord? Pray the lyrics of this song. Pray over the face of your friends that you have been called to, that you would go to them, that they would see Jesus in your life. Surrender the excuses. Accept God's grace over your weaknesses. Repent of whatever stubbornness may be happening in your heart. Y'all, the front's open for prayer. Your leaders are open to pray over you and to talk with you. So let's respond in prayer and in worship to God who sees and hears us, and respond to what he is going to do in us after this place. I love you guys like crazy. Let me pray for you, and then we'll respond. Dear God, thank you so much for tonight. Thank you for safety in the ankle balloon busting game. I'm glad that nobody got too severely injured, just balloons. But thank you that we have a place that we can come and do that. Thank you that we have a community and a family here who wants to walk with us, who wants to love on us. God, I pray that this place would be a launching pad. I pray that it be holy ground. I pray that starting tonight, we'd surrender the excuse of why we don't go and share our faith and share Jesus with the people around us. That we trust that you are Jehovah Jireh, like we talked about last week, that you'll provide. That we trust your sovereignty, that you're in control. That if we're obedient to what you called us to, that we relinquish control and give it to you and trust that on your authority, what you desire to happen will happen. That we just trust you. So God, I pray that during this time of response that we wouldn't just go through motions. God, I pray that the Holy Spirit be active. You promise that your word is quick and active and sharper than any two-edged sword. God, I pray that tonight over these students. Pray it tonight over these leaders. God, I pray that we'd surrender to you. I pray that we'd trust you. I pray that we'd be real about who you are to us with those that are around us. Thank you for your son. It's just in my prayer. Amen.